If you're like me, you're probably conservative with your finances. After all, it's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep. Personally, I love this quote from rich dad Robert Kiyosaki and think it's never been more important. Because with inflation at a record high of 8.6% and the economy heading for a recession, we're losing money whether we invest it in stocks or keep it in the bank. So, what should you do? Well, experts at Morgan Stanley suggest putting money into safer alternative assets like high-end art. Why art? Well, the value of works by legends like Picasso and Warhol has a near zero correlation with stocks, meaning art can help protect your investment portfolio from risks. Plus, it can still drastically increase in value despite the chaos in the world. For instance, the art investing platform Masterworks handed investors over 30% net returns from 4 separate paintings since 2019. Of course, past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but with gains like that, I can see why members have invested over $500 million in their paintings. Now, I want you to all have smart, diversified portfolios. It's crucial. I'm delighted to report that Masterworks is offering a special deal. If you go to masterworks.io/sadtruth, you get priority access today. That's masterworks.io/sadtruth. I'll see you there. See important disclosures at masterworks.io/cd. Again, that's masterworks.io/sadtruth. Here we go. Hey guys, long fan of Bryan Callen. I finally somehow convinced him to come on my show. I'm going to introduce who you are, but first say hello.
How you guys doing?
Hey, look at this guy trying to sport. By the way, I had a beard for something like 10 years, and then I went to Southern California for 5 weeks, decided to take off the beard to give the glorious Middle Eastern skin a bit of rest. And now I think everybody's saying you've got to grow back the professorial beard, so it's coming back. What do you think?
I like the scruff. I like the scruff, man. I think it looks great.
All right.
I'm at 55 years old now. I tend to bring my beard down because I just get grayer and grayer, and so I'll do whatever I can. I'm wearing Invisalign. You know, the dentist said your teeth are a mess, so now I'm in adult braces. It only goes downhill from here. You get to a certain age at 55. Let it go, because you can fight gravity, but you know it's that Red Queen problem where you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. And so here we go. You come to terms with your limitations.
All right. So let me introduce you for the few people who have lived on another planet. Stand-up comedian, actor, podcaster. Current podcast is titled "The Fighter and the Kid," co-hosted with your friend Brandon Schaub.
Yep.
Schaub. You have a new YouTube show, Best of with Bryan Callen, which we can talk about. Now, I of all of you, so you've been on countless shows, News Radio, Frasier, The King of Queens, How I Met Your Mother, The Goldbergs, Entourage. You've been in many movies, Hangover 1, 2, Old School. The one that got my kids excited, you ready?
Yeah.
They've become huge fans of The King of Queens, so I'm kind of reliving The King of Queens through their eyes, which is fantastic. It's one of my favorite shows. And you're the guy on the show where he's trying to convince you to invite him to the barbecue, correct?
That's exactly right.
When I told this to my son, it's as if I was telling him we're interviewing Michael Jordan. He's like, oh, I have to meet him. But they left, unfortunately, to go see my in-laws. So it's amazing the power that these moments, when we bring in people into our living room. Tell us about any of these shows. Take it away. You've got so many stories. Go for it.
Well, I think that what's interesting about when you've grown up watching somebody, you know, or just there's something about watching someone under favorable circumstances, especially if they're making you laugh. There is something very mysterious about that. And then when that fourth wall is broken and they're in front of you, you know, I did a reading one time with Tom Cruise. And then 6 months later, I got to speak to him just sort of one-on-one for an hour and a half. I couldn't stop just looking at his face.
Yeah.
I was so beside myself, and I was a grown man. I was probably 40, but I was so excited to be there And it was because I had grown up with him. I met Al Pacino. It was the same thing. I made a fool of myself. One thing you never say to Al Pacino ever is don't mention his movies. I know this. I'm in the business. And the first thing I said, even though the voice was saying don't mention his movies, act normal, I looked at him and I said, I just finished watching Scarface again. And you know what he did? He went, uh-oh.
But were you able to then recover from that and have a good conversation?
No, I wasn't, Gad. No, I wasn't. I'm glad you asked. No. So celebrity or whatever you want to call it is a strange thing for all of us. Even if other people look at you and they think you're something, because you don't feel that way. I'm just showing up and acting.
Yeah.
And the process, I think if people could see what acting is really about, what it really is like to sit on to be in a movie, they would not want to be actors because it's so tedious, piecemeal. It's done. I was on the Joker for 5 days with Joaquin Phoenix. I ended up on the cutting room floor, but I was dressed like a washed up male stripper. That's a whole nother story. And but watching him work, watching that guy eat an apple a day and smoke cigarettes to stay as skinny as he was and to stay in character, I can't do that. That's why he won an Oscar. I can't do it.
I got to tell you, I'm glad you mentioned Joker because as I was preparing for the intro, I saw that you had the credits of Joker, but I didn't remember seeing you in that. Now, I as a general rule, I despise actors. Like I have a great no, but it really is true.
Your heart's in the right place.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, Anthony Hopkins and Al Pacino and Joaquin Phoenix in Joker, those are real actors. They're thespians. I was watching him in the final scene where he's kind of standing on the car. I had goosebumps all over my body. To me, he was like Lionel Messi. If you know soccer, when you watch Lionel Messi, my wife, whenever my wife hears me screaming in the house, and she goes, well, whenever God screams like a little girl, it's probably because he's watching Lionel Messi. So how was it interacting with Joaquin Phoenix? I mean, I love that you said that he only ate an apple, method acted, the whole thing. Tell us about that.
Well, so when you work with people like that, he doesn't say hi or bye. You're in the room with him, and he doesn't get out of character. He doesn't even look at you.
Really?
And I respect that. I think I share your sort of contempt in some ways of actors, including of myself. But I think because we have this idea that a lot of times you can really, it's very difficult to make it in the business, but you also are treated like royalty. And so people like that get an inflated sense of self-importance and even think of themselves sometimes as historically significant, which is nothing less than embarrassing. But I think that whenever we look at a guy like Christian Bale or we look at a guy like Joaquin Phoenix, what we're actually seeing is someone truly involved in the endeavor and the impossible endeavor in many ways, of the courageous endeavor of original self-expression.
Right.
The reason we love great artists is because they do something that shocks us. And it doesn't just shock us. It also brings us into this state of arrested development or high relief where we kind of are reminded. If you watch a great Shakespeare play, if you listen to a great symphony, if you watch Yo-Yo Ma do what he does on a cello, and the list goes on, I think there's something that reminds us of how great human beings can be when they truly realize their full potential. And a little insider information on Joker. Todd Phillips, who for my money is one of the greatest filmmakers ever. That's a masterpiece. He's a genius. But Todd Phillips, and I've had the privilege of knowing him for almost over 20 years now. Todd, when he went out to various, I'm speaking a little out of school, but I happen to know that there were other actors that were on that list. They were trying to think of who could play Joker. And most actors, no matter how good they are, would look at that role and start quaking in their boots. It's a terrifying role
to
take on because everybody is waiting for you to fail. And Joaquin Phoenix was actually recommended by another great actor. I don't want to get into too many details here. But
can you say who it is, or you're...
Maybe I can. I think boy, Todd would be mad at me. I don't want to.
Okay, so don't do it.
Yeah, but there when anytime you have a role like that, the studio will come to you and say, here are the ideas. Even if you're Todd Phillips, you've got a very short list of actors, but those actors, all of them, including, I'm sure, Joaquin Phoenix, I mean, that's a very scary process. So what you're watching is not only just original self-expression, but someone who had the courage to make these choices. And when we were doing the scene, he improvised things that were shocking. Wow. We thought he broke his hand when he punched the clock. It was time to punch the clock. That wasn't in the script. I pretended to shoot myself at one point, and he went like this and fell back. And Todd Phillips came over and goes, don't do that again. Don't do that. Because you never know what he was going to do. So he was in a state.
Wow.
And I think that what I love about any kind of art, acting, is all of us, you don't have to be an expert. All of us, when you see Christian Bale in The Fighter, you see Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker, all of us immediately, I don't care if you're a fool or the most sophisticated movie buff in the world, we stop.
Yeah.
We stop. We get mesmerized. And what happens when you get mesmerized? What really happens? Let's talk about that. What really happens when you watch something inspiring? You forget you're human for a while.
Right.
You forget you have to go to the bathroom. You forget you like sex. You forget about food. You just somehow go, you say to yourself, it's probably as close to witnessing God as you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It really is.
I mean,
maybe atheist, but you just get overly inspired. When Pele did that kick,
scissors kick, yes, of course.
You know, people cried.
Yeah.
They cried because they were overwhelmed with how beautiful life can be.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, that's spoken like a real lover of the craft. So let me ask you this. I mean, I as you probably know, I study human psychology. And so I'm interested in, so for example, if I told you, well, what makes Michael Jordan so great, we could probably break down several elements that makes it that he was more likely to be great than you might have been as a basketball player. So if we take all of the people who wish to break out into acting, but yet they don't become Anthony Hopkins, which one is Sir? The one from Silence of the Lambs is which one? Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins.
Hopkins, or if it's the guy from Joker or so on. Are there a set of personality traits that they score high or low on that makes them more likely to be great actors than the rest of us?
You know, it's a little bit like saying who's going to be a great quarterback in the NFL. There are so many moving parts, and I don't think that's. I do think, from my experience, the big stars that I know, the people that have really become huge, are inhumanly disciplined. And they have a deep love for the craft for whatever reason, and probably some healthy dysfunction.
You think so, huh?
Yes, I don't listen. I don't think you need to love yourself to be successful in life. In fact, you should always have this queer sense of dissatisfaction and inadequacy. I really believe
that you try to then you try to compensate for that inadequacy by being good. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Gad, I've listened to you. You're a very smart man.
Thank
you
you.
know a lot. I love listening to your perspective. I love what you study. You know, you study the idea of hormones and how they affect buying. There's all this stuff that you do. But I bet that part of the reason that you work so hard is because you don't think of yourself as a genius or really smart. Oh, God. No, it's always a struggle. You know, you're always learning, and the idea is how do you come up with something original? You're in the same business. When you write a book or when you have you're trying to. It's always a struggle. So I don't think that loving yourself. I don't think that. You know, I hate that expression, believe in yourself. What do you mean believe in myself? Kiss my ass. If I learn how to navigate these rough waters, I'll believe in myself. But they've got to be very specific rough waters. If I put you in the ring with a fighter and you don't know how to fight, you're not going to believe in yourself.
But I wonder if, so in any creative process, there is uncertainty and you know, so on. But I wonder if in acting, it's even more brutal in that the difference between the person who makes it or not is often up to some vagaries that are really outside the control of the person who is auditioning, right? So So we all go through rejection. So if you look at, for example, the average rejection rate of a top academic journal, you're talking about 95% rejection rate. And this is involving all people who are the top of the top. 95% of their papers are going to be rejected. So that's okay.
Which
but
is probably a good thing in academia, but keep going.
Yeah, right. But at least you'd like to think, notwithstanding what's going on in academia today, that I have a better sense of why my paper was rejected or not. Not always, but at least there's some sense. You know, the theoretical conceptual idea wasn't well developed, or I should have used another analysis. But in acting,
It's not linear.
Exactly. So then does that then cause a fracture of the self, because I'm constantly rejected and I don't know how I should change to become successful, but I really want to make it, but I don't know if it's going to happen for me.
Which is why I hate acting.
Right.
Which is why I have no loyalty to acting. Which is why acting is, for the most part, a heartbreak for all of us. I love stand-up comedy.
I was going to come to that. Okay, exactly.
And the reason I love stand-up comedy is because I write it, and it's so black and white. You're either laughing or you're not. There are three things you can't fake, I always say. Comedy, they're either laughing or not. Fighting, you're either on the canvas or you're not. And dance, you can either dance or you can't.
And let me interject.
And singing.
Probably my first conversation ever with our mutual friend Joe Rogan, when I was on the show, he looked at me, and of all the things we've talked about, it's one of the things that stayed in my mind the most, is he said almost the same thing that you just said, but he linked it to my work. He said, you know, when I get up in front of a crowd, I can't fake it. I can't phone it in. It's either you find me funny or you don't. If you step into the MMA ring, there's no hiding. And he goes, when you stand up and you pontificate on issues, if it's full of shit, you will quickly know it. You can't fake that when you're so much at the... And I thought that was such a beautiful way to bring all of our authenticity together.
Well, you pay a price for being wrong.
Yeah.
You cannot get good at comedy. You cannot get good at fighting without the price has to be pain. The price of adjustment is pain.
Right.
It's the only way you
the pain from them not laughing when you put a joke. Okay.
Sure. You have to. It's objective reality. You know, it's quiet. This joke ain't working, son. I don't care how esoteric you are. And singing is the same way. I mean, you know, there's haiku that somebody wrote that said, even with insects, some can sing and some cannot. You know, and it's just the way it is, man. I'm sorry. When I was in theater school, I did some singing, and the teacher, God bless her, God bless this woman. She said, listen to me, you're very funny. My grandfather said the same thing to me later, but she said, you're very funny, very charming. You're not going to be the kind of singer that drops people's jaw. Right. I just want you to know that. Focus on what you're good at. Thank you, man. Thank you. God bless that angel.
Honest feedback. There you go.
If I tried to look her up, she probably wouldn't exist. She was probably an angel, you know, or something. But these are very important things to understand.
What are some singers? Who are some singers that drop your jaw? Maybe I'll start. Can I start with some?
Yeah. Sure.
You ready? We're almost the same age, so you might know some of these guys. I'm a huge Philly sound fan. So the Stylistics, the Delphonics. Are you familiar with some of these groups? Do you know who those are?
Philly Sound? I don't know. Philly Sound. Never.
Stylistics, You Are Everything and Everything Is You. Do you remember? These are the guys who have usually a lead singer who sings in falsetto, very, very high notes.
Oh, wow.
Another one, do you know Minnie Riperton? Does that...
I don't. I'm hopelessly ignorant.
Oh, okay. Because it exactly speaks to the point that you were mentioning of someone dropped, you know, they're stopped in their tracks because this singer, Minnie Riperton, was the only one until Mariah Carey came along that can sing in what's called the whistle range. It's basically at a high pitch that's impossible for humans to carry. So please listen to Minnie Riperton. There's a great song called Loving You. It's the first slow song that I danced to in grade 5 when we had moved from Lebanon to Montreal. So it has a great personal connection to me. Please listen to it. But tell me, who are some of your folks that you love?
So what you're talking about is athletics a little bit. So when you look at Ariana Grande, she's astonishing.
Yeah.
You will not find anybody on Broadway who doesn't bow at her feet because Ariana Grande has an absolutely astonishing range
yeah.
and power where she can do anything she wants. And that's one thing. When you look at somebody with an instrument, gifted with an instrument, it's athletic. There's something incredibly athletic. But I think there's an X factor with singing. There's an X factor with so you look at Ariana Grande, and then you listen to Billie Holiday. And Billie Holiday sang, for lack of a better term, she sang technically wrong in a way. She was crying. She was doing something. Yet she was a giant. Yet if you listen to Strange Fruit with that trumpet that accompanies it, if you don't start crying, then there's something wrong with you. And so I've always been fascinated with people, and they said, what is it about you and your success, your ability to sing? And she said, hunger.
Right.
Real hunger. I grew up hungry. I had to sing to keep my grandmother in her apartment in Harlem in the middle of the winter because our rent was overdue and we were going to get kicked out on the street and she was going to die. So at 13 years old or 14, she went to every speakeasy and picked up $13 at the end of that night, which was a lot of money back then. And she said people were crying into their beers. Whatever that is, to me, is what I always think about when it comes to truly inspired our artistry that seems to last forever. There are just some artistic expressions that are the cornerstones of our culture.
What you just mentioned about hunger is the way that I would repackage that in the kind of academic talk, and it's something that I discuss in my forthcoming book on how to live a good life and so on. It's the anti-fragility, right? So this is who actually I'm after we finished chatting, I have a phone chat with the author of Anti-Fragility, who is a good friend of mine. He's a Lebanese guy, Nassim Taleb.
I've read his book. I've read Skin in the Game.
Yeah,
I read Black Swan. He's great, and a fellow Lebanese.
A fellow Lebanese, exactly. Yeah. And so Anti-Fragility, you're exactly spot on. I think that for all the horrors I went through the Lebanese Civil War, and I wouldn't wish that on any child or any human, it has taught me to be resilient, because whenever I face certain trials and tribulations in my life, and I think about what we got out of from Lebanon, I'm like, I can go like this because it was really, truly part of my lived experience. And so that's why, incidentally, I'm so annoyed by the faux victimology, because some of us actually really went through some difficult periods where we really had to run fast so that our heads are not detached from the rest of our bodies. So I'm totally with you that I think there's facing stressors early in your life. I mean, stressors that are not fatal ultimately will make you stronger.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I feel like saying to these people who are complaining about how words hurt, I want to say, listen, you're a privileged Canadian. You're a privileged American, full stop. Pick up a history book, or better yet, just pick up a newspaper. Get a little perspective, right? Because you're out of your mind, and you should take a look at how dangerous your ideas are, by the way, and where they lead to. Right. That's all.
We'll come back to all the woke stuff in a second, but before we do that, how is it for you to hold the positions that you do and navigate within the ecosystem of Hollywood and the entertainment industry? Do you think that you've been blackballed, or do you have lesser chances of getting roles, or were you able to kind of overcome any of those obstacles?
I don't know. I never really think about it. I'm in the business of satire. I'm in the business of looking at the folly of myself and other human beings. I think that my feeling, and you probably appreciate this, is that so much of how we behave is a product of our evolutionary biology, how we have evolved. Now, you can pass all kinds of laws and you can pass all kinds of new cultural parameters, but they just never can compete with biology.
Yeah.
They just can't compete with they can initially, they can suppress it. They can't change it.
Well, this is E.O. Wilson. Sorry to interrupt you. E.O. Wilson, the famous evolutionary biologist from Harvard, who recently passed away, has a famous quote, which I often use, where he says that genes hold culture on a leash. So there's an opportunity for different cultures to have some margins of plasticity, but ultimately you are bound by your biological blueprints.
Yeah, he was so great. He also said about Marxism, he said, Marxism, great idea.
Wrong. Come on. That's like my favorite quote. I even have it in the Parasitic Mind.
He's great. He's great. Yeah, I love him. He was a great thinker, and that's a good example of, you know, when you say, well, holding the line. No. I'm just responsive to the evidence.
Right.
I do the best I can to read the people I disagree with. I have read. I'm just an actor, but I have read the critical race theorists.
Yes.
I took my time. I read Ibram Kendi's terrible book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I read that other terrible book, Anti-Fragility, White Fragility.
White Fragility, yeah.
These are just, they're anemic in their scholarship. And this is an actor with a BA in history talking. I'm not a PhD. I'm not an academic, but I can tell you that. So one of the advantages of speaking to a lot of academics, and you, by the way, are a big exception to this, and I've said this before, but one of the things about speaking to most academics is I noticed that they had such a limited perspective on just the everyday life that most of us lead.
Totally.
We are constructing a life, and it's very difficult to. Most academics are able to sit back, be very narrowly focused in what they do, and then from there deconstruct the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I listened to this professor talk about Jacques Derrida. Can you think of anything more, a bigger waste of time than to become an expert on Jacques Derrida? That balloon. He's a balloon of air. He had great hair. That's a guy who didn't make the soccer team.
Yeah.
You know, I can't stand it. So some of these academics, I'm just like, that's how you spend your life, bro? That's how you spend your life? You sit there and behind an expensive wall in your purified echo chamber. It's a lot like this. MMA is the greatest thing because when I used to study a lot of martial arts, when you study martial arts, when you go to a karate school, okay, and to be in our generation, your karate master in that class was the fattest guy in the planet. He never fought. He never had any fights under his belt, never got in a ring or a cage, and he certainly never was on the street. He was just the 5th degree black belt or something, or whatever it was. And then MMA came along.
Right.
And they were like, hey, your kung fu is no good here.
Right.
You know, let's see what you do. Just come over here and let's see what you got. That's a good example of the difference between academics. And by the way, what I should say, it seems the reason I love how you think and how you write and how you talk in comparison to a lot of the others. And maybe that comes from the fact that you had to go through a war.
I'll tell you what else it is, I think, if I may, and thank you for the lovely compliments. And I wholeheartedly agree with you regarding the idiocy of most. I mean, as a matter of fact, having been in academia for now close to 30 years, I can assure you that many comics are probably smarter than many academics because it takes a great amount of intelligence to get up in front of people who have paid to be entertained by your little quips, right?
Yeah, strangers from everywhere.
That takes a lot of intelligence, whereas many people could be studious enough to become very, very experts in a very narrow band. Now, again, I'm not denigrating academia. Of course,
No.
we need academics to push the boundaries of human knowledge. But most academics are profoundly imbecilic once they step out of their lane. And I think one of the reasons why I've been able to build a large platform, number one, because I'm able to just as easily speak to Bryan Callen, to a corrections officer, and to the fanciest of professors at Stanford, because I am multifaceted. Not I'm a chameleon.
It's not because you're multifaceted. I'm gonna tell you why it is.
Okay, go.
It's because you really believe that you're not better or smarter
Exactly
than your
right. Exactly
because
right.
you know how the world works. You're very good at figuring out, you've studied how hormones interact with our behavior, and yes, in evolutionary biology, and you have your degree in mathematics. Sure, you know a lot, but you know as well as I do that intelligence is incredibly compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And you know, there's certain wisdom that comes from, obviously I'm not smarter than young people. I've just made all the mistakes you're about to make. You know, so please, I have better pattern recognition.
Right.
You're headed toward a wall, just turn the wheel a little. Please listen to me. That's all. That's very shiny, but it's got a hook in it.
You don't have any children, do you?
I had 3 children.
Oh, you have 3 children. Okay, I didn't know that.
A 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 6-month-old.
So, congratulations.
I'm an old dad.
With the, if I may ask an intrusive question, with the lovely lady that I saw just before in the shot?
That is correct.
Oh, well, congratulations. Wow, 55 years old and a dad. Well, I know someone who beat you. One of the most famous evolutionary psychologists, who's a great friend of mine, his name, you may even know him. He actually wrote the preface to this book, The Consuming Instinct, David Buss.
Okay. I don't know.
You don't know?
I know David Sloan Wilson.
David Sloan, you know what? David Sloan Wilson and I were very good friends, and we had a falling out. Do you want to know why we fell out? You ready?
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Because, but first, let me finish about David Buss. David Buss is almost 70, and he just had a child. So you're a youngin compared to him. So there you go. David Sloan Wilson, academically phenomenal guy. He instituted the first EVOS program. EVOS stands for Evolutionary Studies. It's a university-wide degree that a student in any field can get a minor in evolutionary thinking, precisely because evolution impacts everything that involves biological beings. And I was actually trying to recreate his program, which he started at SUNY Binghamton, to be the first Canadian school to have it. So we were simpatico. He invited me multiple times to SUNY Binghamton. You know, everything was great. And then I did the horrifying thing of criticizing Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama on Twitter. Now, I didn't know. I was under the completely misguided view, number one, that I lived in a free country where I can exercise my right to express an opinion about the politician. And even as a Canadian, that I had the capacity to make. But he started writing, you know, my dear friend Saad is one of the great evolutionary psychologists, but unfortunately he has lost his humanity. I hope he finds it. So apparently I went from being human, like I had the imprimatur of a human, but I lost that title when I had the audacity to criticize Nobel Prophet Barack Obama. So that shows you my next book, Parasitic Mind, what happens to profoundly intelligent people like David Sloan Wilson, who are unable to have theory of mind to say, here is a good friend of mine who may hold different political opinions.
So I use David as an example. David, I've interviewed David twice. He's a lovely man.
Yes.
An intelligent man. His contributions, I've read his books, and
he's unbelievable.
Yeah. But David is an example. He's the classic example of highly intelligent and the most sheltered, narrow. I hope he hears this because I'm not being insulting.
Yes.
I'm just telling you, we got in an argument because David Sloan Wilson uses hunter-gatherer tribes, okay, hunter-gathering tribes and their structures and how they live to ascend. And I don't want to paraphrase the man because he's got a hell of a brain and he's very nuanced in his thinking. But David basically believes we should be taxing people 80%. He is as close to a communist, certainly a heavy socialist as it gets. The problem with David is David has never lived in the marketplace.
Yeah.
David has no idea, and I mean the first idea of how to raise money for a business, how to run a business. He didn't know what an agent was.
Right.
You can hear it on my podcast. Well, I didn't record it, but they wanted me to host an evolutionary biology sort of like a conference, and they wanted a comedian. And what I said, David, if you guys are trying to raise $100,000, I can do that very easily. You just go out to an agent. And David said, wait, Bryan, this is fascinating. Are you telling me there are people you can go out to?
Oh my God.
He had no idea. David doesn't have a clue about how the marketplace works because David has never had to make the trains run on time. David's never had to come up with a product that people want. He's never had to compete. David sits behind very expensive walls and is a wonderful academic, but stay in your lane. David should not be talking about economics and tax policy. He is as ignorant to that as I am in what he does. And that's the problem when an academic who is that narrow, who lives at the bottom of a well and only sees that much, his own sliver of the sky, when he starts talking about the part of the sky he can't see, we are in trouble. And that's my biggest problem with the people who are controlling the narrative in this country. Don't pay a price for being wrong. And they sit around and they're not living the kinds of lives that all of us are, which is, I have to compete. If I don't put butts in the seat as a comic, I don't make money.
Yeah.
And that requires a consideration of about 15 or 20 things that he's never even thought about. Yet he's telling me about tax policy.
But see, at least, I mean, of both of the weaknesses that we just described, yours, in my mind, is less egregious than the interaction I had with him, because in your example,
100%,
right, he's just wrong, or he's misinformed, or he's ignorant.
That's an outrageous statement, and it gives you an example of how the left, how people like David Sloan Wilson, who is a lovely man and very intelligent, but it really gives you an idea of who they would really be in power if someone disagreed with their vision
exactly
of the utopian world they're trying to create. And you know why? Because David, and he's forgiven because he's so smart, actually believes he's smarter than everybody he's talking to and writing for panoramically.
Well, I'm currently reading, I'm almost done with it, Thomas Sowell's Vision of the Anointed from 1995. And I was so excited as I started reading it, because I said, every word in there is exactly spot on. Like, not a syllable, not a comma, not a period. And David, and I'm going to say someone else, people are going to say, oh, you're obsessed with Sam Harris. I'm not. But Sam Harris, unfortunately, is also a member of the Vision of the Anointed Club, because Sam and I, you may or may not know this. You know who Sam Harris is?
Very well, yeah.
Yeah. So Sam and I were, good friends. I've been on his show. We've been to dinner together. We've communicated many times. I kind of sat quietly while he went insane on Trump for 4 years, because I kind of have a code of conduct. Maybe it's the GAD code of conduct. Maybe it's the Middle Eastern code of conduct. I don't like to go, I go after people when they piss me off hard. But if I know you well, then I won't do that because of the code. So for 4 years, I sat quietly while Sam Harris linked every possible ill to Donald Trump. I mean, there's going to be a nuclear holocaust. We're going to have the barter system. The economy is going to crash. He's going to outlaw sex. He's going to eat your children. And after about 4 years, as he was, stepping down from being president, I did a couple of sort of mocking, kind of classic GAD satirical little pieces where I was clearly mocking Sam's hysteria, right? I'm hiding under the table and so on and so forth. Well, rather than kind of playing along and saying, oh, I guess I deserve this, GAD is making fun of me, he unfollows me and so on. Now, I don't give a shit whether you unfollow me or not, but it's the signal of what that conveys, right? That you weren't sufficiently anti-fragile. Say, hey, you know what, Gad? Why don't you come back on my show? Or why don't I come on your show and let's hash out whether I was right to be so anti-Trump, or whether maybe you had some good points as to why we shouldn't be so hysterical against Trump. But he didn't. Therefore, he's part of the Castrati Club.
Well, I've listened to a lot of Sam Harris. I've listened to his podcast. I've read his books. I think I've given Sam a really fair shake, and I'm a fan. I like him. I think he's an important voice. The one thing I would say, and I hate talking. I haven't met Sam, so I don't want to talk behind his back. But I would at least ask him this question, and it's a question. Sam has a very strong idea of how he feels about things like free will, and how probably a society should be structured, and his notion of how antiquated and detrimental and barbaric certain religions are, like the Old Testament, like the Quran, and all these things. I understand. He goes hard in the paint with that stuff. But I do get the sense, even though he debates and has people on he disagrees with, I do have and get the sense that he hasn't changed his mind once.
Exactly.
I've listened to everything. I've really listened to him. I would say the only indictment is, Sam, I haven't heard you get swayed once. Maybe I'm being unfair.
Well, in fairness to him, he did put out a tweet, and I only know this because somebody tagged me to say, hey, look, he had written about, now finally the adults are in the room, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, won the presidency and vice presidency. And then later he put out a tweet and saying, I am slowly eating my words one syllable at a time, meaning that he was admitting that he was wrong. So at least he's got it.
I like him a lot. I mean, I don't know him, but I really enjoy him, and I've gotten a lot out of him, and especially his spirituality without religion, and he's got this wonderful app called Waking Up. And
Yeah.
he's such a complicated, special guy. But I would ask him. I mean, I wonder if he has ever done what is the word? An accounting of how many times he has allowed himself to at least change his perspective a little bit.
Yes.
He's very steadfast in and he's worked hard for it. He's worked hard for his point of view. He's worked hard for his philosophy. But I do think, I wonder if he would be better served being a little more malleable.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he'd ask me for specific examples, which I could probably give him. But that seems to be, so I'll give you an example of what I think he can tend to, the trap he might fall into as smart as he is. And I heard, this was Hitchens and this was also Dawkins. They seem to have a very literal idea of what religion is to people, right? I know that the Old Testament and the Israelites were not a nice group.
Yeah.
And I know that the God of the Old Testament was a very unforgiving and jealous and vengeful God,
Yes.
a homophobe and a misogynist. I get it all. But and you could find passages in the Quran, you could find passages in the Old Testament, you could find passages in the New Testament that are contradictory and that are old-fashioned and stuff like that. But I wish that they had given people who find meaning in religion, meaning in mythology, a little more credit. They know that too.
Right.
But they get a lot out of the overall motifs, the overall ideas, the guidance that is something akin to self-restriction and the value therein.
Yeah.
You'll pay a price if you don't. And I think the great rebuttal to the new atheist has been Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I was just going to mention him, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I appreciate him so much. I've read word for word the Old Testament and the Quran.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand.
Nice.
I've read it word for word. I haven't read it. I haven't skimmed it. I've read it word for word. So I understand. I'm right with you that it's not, we wouldn't want to hang out with the Israelites.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating about the Old Testament is that the leaders, the founders of the house of Israel, Israel, by the way, means to wrestle with God. It comes from Jacob, but they are so flawed, and yet they were left in there.
Yeah.
The first people on earth were Cain and Abel, who killed. Cain killed Abel because he was jealous. And they left it in there. So there's a lot to be gleaned. There's a great deal of value, and I wish Sam gave believers a little more credit. Right. And that also, by the way, goes back to what I'm saying, is when you are not mixing with everyday people. And to Sam's credit, Sam said, I don't have anybody in my phone book who smokes, works.
Yes. Well,
God bless Sam for saying that, because that is a major liability. So I think, I don't like talking about Sam when he can't be here to rebut, but I do think that he's aware of that. But I wish,
so I'm gonna. So because we mentioned Sam and you mentioned Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and so on, I'm gonna take it now to some personality traits that I either appreciate or not in people, and then we can use these as exemplars. So someone like Christopher Hitchens, whom I've regrettably never had the pleasure of knowing, as you know, I often use the term activate your inner honey badger, right? Because the honey badger is this most ferocious animal on earth, right? So Christopher Hitchens, for better or worse, was the ultimate honey badger, right? I mean, he wore his emotions on his sleeve. You knew where you stood with him. He didn't equivocate his positions for careerist interests. He didn't equivocate his positions because it wasn't consistent with his brand image. Whereas I remember, for example, and again, this is not to bash Sam. He's a lovely guy, and if he watches this, please don't think that we're trying to bash you, because I'm only using him as an exemplar of something. I remember one time we were chatting, Sam and I, and he said, "Well, do you think I should invite I don't know, I think it was Robert Spencer, who's a big anti-Islam critic. I think that's who it was." I said, yes, you should. You know, he's a great guy, and we had a great conversation on my show. And he said something like, but, you know, I don't think that it would be consistent with my brand or with my... See, that totally turned me off, because if you know anything about me, Bryan, and I think you do, you watch my stuff, I am authentic to a fault, right? So sometimes my wife will say, why can't you keep your fat mouth shut just so that we can find a way to get to Southern California? Why do you always have to speak what's... Because I'm driven by authenticity. Because to me, if I equivocate in any way, when I go to bed at night, as I've explained this on a million occasions, when I go to bed at night, the only thing that cures my insomnia is to know that I was fully authentic on any given day. If not, yes, it's a very high exacting standard, but then I feel like a fraud. But if I've always said exactly how I feel, right or wrong, then at least I was always truthful and authentic.
Yeah.
The problem with guys like Sam and others who are, or politicians, is that they're checking where the wind is going. No, I have deontological first principles. I know how to defend them. Come at me and let's see who wins.
Well, to defend Sam a little bit, I think Sam's really courageous in a lot of ways. Like Sam said some stuff, and he is driven. I think Sam's very intellectually honest. I really do. I just think Sam has gotten so much heat.
Yeah.
From his, like, the Ben Affleck interview.
Yes.
Sam is a sensitive guy.
Yes.
I don't know him, but I know people that know him. Like Joe Rogan, like, talks about how funny Sam is. He's got a great sense of humor.
Yes.
But he's hilarious, and he's overall just, you know, a great guy in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And so I think that with Sam, I think he took the fight on. I think he took it on, and he took it on full bore, and got so much.
Very true. You're spot on.
And by the way, I'm talking about death threats. I'm talking about real death threats, real anti-Semitic kind of, you know, he dealt with a lot of the actually dangerous situations. I believe that. And so I think what happens with a guy like Sam is after a while, he goes, dude, let me just stick to meditation. Like now he just wants to talk about fucking my Waking Up podcast, because it's not, he's got children. Yeah. He's got a wife. He's trying to live his life. And all he's trying to do is say, hey, I see some major inconsistency here, but it's dangerous out there. Yeah. It's dangerous. And if you're a guy like Sam Harris, who speaks his mind, when you get that much hate, I think that it actually just becomes so exhausting that you get so disheartened. And that's what I got from it.
Yeah, so, no, I have to agree with that. I completely, so point taken. And if Sam ever watches this, we love you, man. We have nothing but respect for you. We may disagree on Trump. Maybe we can patch it up one day, but you're a good guy. Let's move on to something else.
Well, he's a sensitive guy, so yeah, we all are.
He is. Let's talk about, I'm only mentioning this because, you know, obviously he's the #1 podcaster in the world. Joe Rogan, phenomenal guy and authentic, right? Can we agree that one of his biggest reasons for his success is he is exactly adhering to my desperate need to always be authentic? Joe is authentic to a fault. True?
Joe and I just had dinner with him on Thursday in Austin, and Joe and I have always called it the pesky truth. Like, no matter what, you got to get to the truth. Like you can bullshit your way into whatever, but since I've known him for 28 years, and we've been that close, and we always called it the pesky truth. You can bullshit yourself all you want, but the one thing I promise you about him is if you're friends with him, that guy will call you. He'll be like, you don't like that girl, break up with her right now. No, I do. He's like,
listen, he spent 45 minutes a few years ago fat shaming me on his show. Now, I'm not going, I was about 86 pounds heavier.
Oh,
now,
I remember that. I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw it.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to give him all the credit for having lost weight, but let me tell you something. When Joe Rogan and his 20 million fans are fat shaming you, you better take stock of your life, man.
I remember it, bro. I remember that so well. I was like, oh, poor Gad. Fuck, come on, Joe. But you know what? Did you a favor. You look great.
Exactly.
So, you know, that's what he's about. And I think I've always appreciated that about him. He is as well. So I'll give you another example. When I was when I started my podcast and we started getting big and we started getting all these sponsors, he said these sponsors came to us and they were offering a lot of money, but I didn't believe in the product and I just can't do it. I just was like, it was a big company, a big fast food company. I was like, man, I don't eat that shit, so I can't tell my followers to. And Joe said, listen to me very carefully. It's very important that you always believe in the product. the minute you lie to your audience, the minute you pull a fast one, you're fucked, and you should be. And of course, I knew that, but that's him.
Yeah.
He's always been so honest. And I remember when he went through all this crap when they were trying to pin racism on him and stuff. I can tell you, he came from Boston and Newark, New Jersey. And the one thing I noticed about him when we were in our early 20s or mid 20s was that he never once said anything racist. He never used a racist term. He never was anything like that. And he was like very woke, as he was very liberal. Like, and I thought, I know where you come from. I know the Italian, the Irish. I know those areas very well, and they're not terribly forgiving of diversity,
yeah.
or even if they are, there's still a language that surrounds that. At least back when we were young, and he never ever used it. And I said one day, why? I've never heard you utter a racist comment or even a joke. And he said, because I've been around very dumb white people too, dude. Yeah. It's culture. Yeah. It has nothing to do with race. And he quoted, I think, Jack Johnson, the guy who was calling Jack Johnson. He's a credit to his race, the human race. And Joe was making a joke about that in 1995. He said, race, there's no race, there's the human race. People would clap. That was his joke.
Yeah.
And he really believes that. Again, another guy, you know why he's so successful? Because deep down in his heart, he really understands and knows he's not better than the people he's talking to.
He once told me, arguably the nicest thing he ever told me. I've been on a show not nearly as many times as you have, but of sort of the non-comedians, I'm probably one of the most common guests, maybe 8 times. And the nicest thing he ever told me as a compliment, and he's been always so lovely with me, is he said, he introduced me as the Godfather, and he goes, you know what I love so much about you as a professor? You don't take yourself so seriously. You're so down to earth. And I thought, I'm so glad that he said, because oftentimes people who don't know me think that I'm actually arrogant, but then they don't get it. So for example, here's a joke that I always do. You might have seen it on Twitter. I take a selfie of myself, let's say on some beach in Newport Beach, and I go sublime, stupendous, sexy, succulent, and the beach is also nice. Now, I mean, which moron doesn't get that I'm being flippant? I'm joking.
How do you not love you? That's great.
Right? I'm joking. Sometimes I'm engaged in self-aggrandizing, full self-aggrandizing. Sometimes I'm self-denigrating. It's part of my shtick, my bombastic stuff. Some people think that I'm truly arrogant. I think that I am, a narcissist. I'm falling in love with myself in the mirror. But the reality is I'm the exact opposite, right? And so to have someone like Joe on such a big platform, that was probably a bigger compliment to me than if he said you're so brilliant and intelligent and all that, because I'm truly authentic to a fault. And I love that about him and about you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't know how else you're supposed to navigate the world, for God's sake. Good luck taking yourself seriously. And the other thing is, I'm constantly reminded of what a moron I am. So I would always preach being a libertarian, and I've got all my Milton Friedman and another thing about F.A. Hayek and all that shit. And I remember I read Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk, and he in that book talks about all the things that the U.S. government does, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized at 54, whatever it was, I read the book, I don't know the first fucking thing about how government works. I don't have a clue. And more importantly, I don't know anything about the kinds of benefits that I enjoy because of the intelligent people in the Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of whatever it might be, and how important they are to the infrastructure of our country. And so when I say I don't like big government, which I don't, maybe a better way to say it is I don't like government to be too involved in my personal choices and my personal life. And so as you immerse yourself in the best that's been thought and said, as you read people who might, as you read smart people, the point is to be able to change your mind sometime and to admit that you are a bit of a moron when it comes to all these opinions you held over here. That was very humbling.
Yeah. So two stories. Number one, regarding libertarianism, I was walking with my then 9-year-old, he's now 10, son. We were 9-year-old, you said?
I have a 10-year-old
10-year-old,
son.
okay, right. And we were crossing the street in our neighborhood. We live in a residential neighborhood, but that has like kind of a little mini downtown where we kind of always hang out there, a couple of cafes and so on. And as we were crossing the street, there was kind of a cop kind of lying in wait to stop people and give them tickets if they cross the street when it's not, if they're jaywalking. But it's a very residential street. It's a one-way street. So I have the cognitive capacity to look, see that there are no cars coming, and to make the personal agency decision of crossing, even though the government hasn't told me on their sign that it's time to cross. So, but of course I had to do it because I saw her there and she would have probably given me a ticket. So as we were walking, I said, that's the importance of libertarianism. When the government is saying that, if at the time I was 56, I'm 57 now, when a 56-year-old man doesn't have the capacity to know when to cross the street or not with his son, and he needs a 21-year-old female cop who's younger than some of the socks that I still wear to tell me that it's okay to cross or not, that's when the government has gone too far. What do you say?
Of course. The larger problem with government, I think, is that it continues to grow.
Yeah.
Its job is to continue to grow, and I think there's no accountability, and those are the two of the biggest problems. Government should always be treated as a necessary evil. It is necessary, but let's always treat it. I think George Washington said that.
Yeah.
But again, I think the largest thing to worry about, the central question in political philosophy, is who governs the governor.
Right.
Who governs the governor, and but we also have to keep in mind, and I think the founding fathers did, certainly James Madison was fucking amazing about this. You read the Federalist Papers, it is a very human thing. It is maybe one of the central drives. So you talk about the will to power for human
Move
beings,
this way a bit. You're out of focus. Yeah.
For people to want to have power over other people.
Yeah.
And those motives can be good. A lot of times it's like, look, guys, I'm telling you, I know what's best for all of us. And we all do it. I do it all the time.
Sure.
We all do it. And I think that, that's probably where the idea of checks and balances come in. That's where the founding fathers said, power cannot reside in any one group's hands. The biggest threat to our democracy is faction, and factions getting stronger than other factions and annexing those factions, and rule by man, not rule by law.
What is it that, the second thing that I was going to ask you, you're obviously very intellectually engaged, you're a well-read person. Is it something that you cultivated later in your life, or is this something that you can go back to when you were 10 years old, you were devouring books? Is this part of the personhood of Bryan Callen, or did you have to foster this?
I grew up all over the world. I grew up in the developing world. So I was born in the Philippines. I then moved to India, and then I moved to Lebanon.
Yeah.
And
how long did you spend in Lebanon?
5 years altogether. I saw the Civil War. So Lebanon, then Pakistan, then Lebanon again. We got stuck in the war. My father couldn't get back in. We were sleeping in the garage of the Holiday Inn. I heard all
wow.
I saw.
What year?
Bomb a gas station. I saw them shoot missiles. As a kid, you're so, terrified.
Oh, it's called My World. It's called Tuesday in my childhood.
Oh, I know. So then having gone from there, we got evacuated to Greece and then Saudi Arabia. Now, while I was in all those countries in the 70s and the 80s, I also went to communist China. I went to communist Russia. I went to China in 1984. I went to Russia in 1985. When it was still
with your dad, with
my dad and my mother. God bless my father and mother. They were so aware of the consequences of bad ideas. When bad ideas win the day, and I was exposed to this as a child. I saw real poverty in Yemen. I saw real poverty in Pakistan. I remember it very well. When you see somebody with leprosy in Syria, when you see somebody with leprosy on their face in Syria, in a bazaar, and somebody with elephantiasis, and you see that as a child and nobody puts that in perspective, and somehow you've never gone to bed hungry, and somehow you come from America and you're protected, and somehow you see a lot of these children begging for food in Africa behind the glass of an air-conditioned car, you say to yourself, why am I so lucky? I didn't do a damn thing to deserve to be on this side of the glass. Right. Those kids are my age and they're desperate. And when you see that, nobody puts that in perspective. It's very, very traumatic. So for me, I have seen and I have felt and I have smelled and I have been shamed by the accumulation of bad ideas. I come from the side that won history, the side of great ideas. I am a beneficiary, but I did nothing to deserve it.
Right.
And so what happens is, I think, guilt, compassion, empathy, and confusion make for a mix, and you start looking for answers.
See, so
and ideas have consequences. I want to that a good idea.
I wonder if the fact that you were able to sample from the buffet of possible societies is precisely what, not in whole, but in part, allowed you to then recognize the beauty of the United States, notwithstanding some of its stains. Of course, no society is perfect, no human is perfect. Because I've often argued that the reason why some of the staunchest defenders of Western values are immigrants, like myself, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, is because we know what's out there. We know that this is not the default value. Human society is paved by dictators and autocrats. So we're a little bleep, an anomaly in the history of possible buffet of societies. So do you think that that's in part why you fight against woke ideas and so on? Because you've seen all of the stupid ideas that are out there?
Of course. Yeah. Of course. It's part of my DNA.
Yeah.
I did a USO tour in Afghanistan in 2007. Go drive through Kabul, go to Kandahar and watch how those people live. And you tell me how what the Soviets are really about when they went into that country and destabilized it. You know, history is, and Amos Oz, the Israeli writer, said something I'll never forget. He said, the way you beat a bad idea is with a better idea.
Yeah.
And the United States, the founding fathers, I know they owned slaves. I know they had their flaws. But let me tell you, those men in their 30s, along with Benjamin Franklin, who was a lot older, solved the political problem. They did what Socrates and Plato, they did what Plato and Aristotle couldn't do. They somehow figured it out. We owe a debt of gratitude to England, probably, and to the philosophers that came out of Scotland and England, for sure. But for the most part, those men who read the Greeks, who read the Bible, who read everything, who are steeped in their tradition, they figured out a way to solve the political problem. They did. Nobody argues that the Constitution needs to be changed. Sometimes, little tweaks,
sure,
amendments, but for the most part, that is the greatest idea of philosophy, at least political philosophy, and there's no one even close. And so I think that when I see that under threat, being criticized unfairly by people who don't have a clue, who've never been outside this country, who aren't old enough to remember what leprosy looks like, what a civil war looks like, who don't have friends you grew up with, who lost their whole family. I went back to Lebanon after the war. I went back there and I didn't recognize anything from my childhood.
Wow.
I went back to the stables, the Farajalas who owned the stable where I used to go all the time. It wasn't there anymore, man. Nothing was there anymore. And so.
Do you speak Arabic?
Shwaya.
Okay.
But when you see that, man, it makes me nuts.
Right.
And so, I don't know. That's why I take it so personally.
Do you ever foresee taking a hiatus from your entertainment world and going into politics? Is this something that might interest you, or not really?
The problem with politics, until they get campaign finance reform figured out, is you're spending so much of your time fundraising for the next thing. It becomes very hard to be autonomous. It becomes very hard to speak your mind. You got to toe the party line. I couldn't do it. I'm probably a lot like you.
Yeah. Well, I've been approached by many, pretty high powered people in the Canadian ecosystem to say, hey, why don't you run for this and that? And I said, I would be the suckiest politician in the history of the world, because within the first 15 seconds, I'm going to offend this constituency and this one, because I'm going to speak. And they say, oh no, but that's what we need. We need honesty. I'm like, no, I live in the real world. I would suck. You don't want me as a politician.
Yeah, I have a joke where I say the real reason I'd be a shitty politician is I'd probably say, I don't know, sometimes maybe it depends. And I'd be changing my mind, and I'm influential, and no, I don't think I could do it.
Okay.
I'm not interested in it, I suppose.
Got it. Okay, a couple of more questions, and then you've been very kind with your time. Number one, if it hadn't panned out for you in the entertainment industry, what else would Bryan Callen be doing right now? Would he be a chef? Would he be a neurosurgeon? Would he be a professor like yours truly? What would he be doing?
I might have been a teacher of some kind.
At the high school level, you mean?
I taught Taekwondo for a while. I loved that. I like teaching. But it wasn't about the Taekwondo. I think I liked with guiding young people.
Okay.
But I don't know if I would have been effective. You get better as you live a life. But now I think I could teach. I probably would have tried to be a writer.
Okay.
I would have tried to write story. And
so as a novelist, not nonfiction, you mean?
I think probably screenplays, maybe novel, but I don't think I would have been good at it.
But you don't think that this is something that you could take up now? You don't think you have the talent for it, or what?
I just shot my special, and it's going to drop September 3rd. It's called Man Tears, and I think I surprised myself with how I was able to weave a theme. My last special is called Complicated Apes. It's on Amazon for anybody who wants to watch it. But I was proud of it. I'm not proud of much I've done, but I was proud of it because I was able to carry a theme. A theme. So a theme in a book, when an author writes it, if it's a good book, theme is really the author's argument for how one should behave in the world. I mean, that's really the best way I can put it. It's always an argument. Parasitic Mind is that way. It's an argument that you're making. And so I think I did that. And I think I'm getting closer to being able to write thematically. I think I'm getting closer to being able to, but you've got to believe you have something to say. I mean, the other thing is that I don't want to be, at this point, sometimes I think that I have a good memory and I'm good at parroting what I have heard. But being original, I think I do. I think I'm way more original as a comic.
Right.
But, being an original thinker, that's not easy, man. And unless I can do that, I don't know if I'm interested.
Right.
I'll leave it up to guys like you.
Oh, well, aren't you sweet? Okay, question 2. Who? And then one last ending question, and then we'll wrap it up. Question 2: of all the people that you could meet, heroes, they could be in sports, they could be in academia, they could be in entertainment. Who would they be? Before you answer, I'm going to answer it. I actually mentioned it on the most recent appearance on Joe Rogan. We were talking about someone that I would want to invite on my show who's in the entertainment world, and I mentioned 2 people. I said Clint Eastwood, because I grew up in Lebanon watching this quiet, dignified superhero from the spaghetti westerns, and I said I want to be that guy as a little boy. So Clint Eastwood has this kind of unique place in my mind and heart. The second guy was Burt Bacharach. Do you know who Burt Bacharach is?
Yes, these are such strange.
I know.
Gad, you're so intellectually robust. You've got a command of history. Burt Bacharach.
Let me tell you why.
Falling on my head.
You know what? He just had a unique ability to orchestrate. I love creative people. I've listened to him in interviews. His creative impulse attracts me. So anyway, I was mentioning this, and I'll cede the floor to you in a second for you to answer it. So I had mentioned this on the Joe Rogan show, and if this guy is now listening, he should know that I'm pissed off with him and it wasn't cool what he did. I'm going to mention who he is. So Burt Bacharach's son sees me on Joe Rogan, writes to me a few weeks later, says, "Oh, hey, Dr. Saad, I saw your thing. I would love to have my father come on your show. It was so lovely to hear it. So let's see if we can work it out." So I write back excitedly, very authentically with complete humility. "Oh, I'd love to have him on." He doesn't answer. Then I go to California where I'm spending 5 weeks with my family. I say, "Hey, I'm in Newport Beach. Let's make this happen." He doesn't answer. Not fucking cool. Right? I despise this. I don't give a shit what's happening in your life. You reached out to me and asked for him to come. So answer me what. So anyways, that's all I'm going to say about this. Who are your favorite heroes that you'd love to meet?
I love that. Look, probably Da Vinci.
Oh.
Yeah. But the reason I want to meet Da Vinci is because he was such a, what's the word, iconoclast, or he was just such a.
He's a polymath. He's a polymath.
He was a polymath. That's the word. He was a polymath. And the reason I'd like to meet Da Vinci is I'd like to give him the benefit of the scientific discoveries and some of the truths that we now have arrived at, giving him the instrumentation he didn't have back then, to see what he'd do with that.
Before you go on, before you give me anybody else, because I'm so excited what you just said. So I play this game. I've even written an article in Psychology Today about it, where I said if you could meet 10 historical figures throughout history to invite them to dinner, who would they be? Da Vinci's on that list, and I put him as number 1 on that list. So yeah. I am totally with you. Go on.
Yeah, you have to. So Da Vinci, probably Einstein, because he was so playful and could explain big concepts for a moron like me. But not before. If Socrates was real, and he may not have been. It may have been. He may have been a character Plato created. That's what I think. I think Plato created him. So if Socrates existed, he was essentially a Christ figure. I wouldn't mind meeting him, right, of course, to see if he's real. And if not, I'd love to meet Plato.
Just for the record, before you go on, when I answered Clint Eastwood and Burt Bacharach, I meant living entertainment people. You're answering historical figures. Burt Bacharach and Clint Eastwood wouldn't be on that list. So just to be clear.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was saying. I was like, I don't give a shit about entertainment.
No, I was specifically talking about living entertainers that I could actually stomach having a conversation with on my show. Are we clear?
Well, yeah. Now we're talking differently. I mean, there are great writers. They would all be writers. They'd all be great novelists.
Okay.
You know. I like Jonathan Franzen Doerr. There are some people that are really interesting, but that might be sometimes the way people can. Oh, you know who I'd love to talk to?
Yeah,
God, Cormac McCarthy. If you've ever read Blood Meridian,
no, I don't know who that is.
McCarthy,
yeah,
Cormac McCarthy is at the top of the American canon when it comes to novelists, in my opinion. His book, Blood Meridian. Well, when the New York Times mattered. I think it was probably when it came out in 1985. They said this is one of the greatest feats of language, one of the greatest accomplishments, I think, in the English language. It's such an astonishing book, and I would recommend that people listen to it read by a guy named Richard Poe, who's an actor. Don't read it. Listen to it. Take your time with it. It's about scalp hunters in the early 1800s as the West was being settled. You want to talk about brutality.
Wow.
But beauty. And it's like, if you've ever read Lolita by Nabokov,
right,
they're both geniuses they're like modern day Shakespeare with their command of the English language. Cormac McCarthy, he wrote No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yeah.
About all the wild horses. They turn a lot of his books into movies, but he never gives interviews. He gave one interview once to Oprah a long time ago.
I was just going to say, hey, let's bring him on my show. Apparently not. No. Okay.
But he'll say to you, read my book. That's who I am.
Oh, right.
Not what I can say. So I think that it might be a boring conversation.
Oh,
you can't capture genius like that. It's a little bit like, it's like, I can't remember who the philosopher was. He said, I've never talked to God, but I have heard him clearing his throat on occasion. If you look too hard, it's in the corner of your eye.
Right.
Sometimes you can only see things in your periphery. But as far as historical figures, I would love to speak to Tolstoy, and I'd love to speak to Dostoevsky. I want to hear Dostoevsky. I want to hear him talk about Christianity. I want to hear him talk about the fact that he thought his seizures were a gift from God.
Right.
I want to hear Tolstoy talk about the fact that he was obsessed with the notion of self-perfection and achieved self-perfection, achieved all the status, power, and recognition anybody could ever hope for, and became one of the greatest, if not the greatest writer of all time. And at 50, what did he want to do? Kill himself. Yeah. At 50, he wanted to hang himself or shoot himself. I want to talk to that guy to give me some perspective.
Wow, that's deep stuff. Last question, and then we open it up for any promotional things you want to say. I often end with the following question, and I'll set it up. So one of my former psychology professors in my PhD program is a guy by the name of Tom Gilovich, who is a pioneer in studying the psychology of regret. And specifically, the idea that if you ask people, do you regret, looking back in your life, do you regret anything? Well, the taxonomy of regret can be broken up into regrets due to action. I regret that I cheated on my wife and now my marriage fell apart, versus regret due to inaction. I regret that I never pursued a career in medicine and instead went into accounting because my dad told me that that's the right thing to do. And it turns out that over the long haul, most people regret inactions much more than actions. And so with that setup, are you willing to share one or two or three of your biggest regrets so far in your life?
So I've always said that, at least for a man, I can't speak for a woman, a man, his biggest fear is that he's a coward. His biggest aspiration is that he's a hero. And the delineation there is action. Following that inner voice, following that truth, knowing, what you're supposed to do. The rest is denial. It takes 5 minutes to fall in love, the rest is denial. You know what to do.
Right.
You know all the answers. Everything else is procrastination and denial. I'm sorry to say that, everybody, but that's the truth. Oh, I don't know what to do with my life. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. It might be too big to look at. But your best self is clearing his throat in the other room, which might be something close to God.
Right.
And it's really scary to kind of face that. So my biggest fear was that word. My biggest fear was regret. I had seen a movie when I was a young man called The Pope of Greenwich Village.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yep, and he has to leave. The guy has to leave. He has to leave and get away because the mafia is going to kill him. And she says to him, he's getting on the train, and he's a fat, kind of sad guy who's failed at his life. And she says, "How could you let this happen to you?" And he looks at her and says, I let my whole life happen to me.
Right.
And the doors closed. And I went, I started crying in the movie. I went, that's never going to be me, man. That's never going to be me. I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be a comic. I'm going to be everything I want to be. I'm going to get my black belt. I'm going to do all the things I want.
Wow.
So my only regret maybe is that I didn't wrestle in college, because I was a really good high school wrestler. And I should have wrestled D1, and I should have been, but okay. All right. But that's honestly my only regret. And I think that, I've made mistakes, of course, and you've tangled up with the wrong kinds of people and things like that. Man, if I went back in time, I would have made different mistakes. Right. I always quote this Zen poet who wrote a book I read when I was a young man, and the book was titled One Continuous Mistake.
Yeah, right.
That's what life is, and that's the point. You will not see God sipping margaritas on a beach.
Except hopefully the creation of our children are not mistake. I'd like to think so, no?
Well, the children, though, come, I'll quote Khalil Gibran,
yeah.
They come through you, not from you. Yeah. And so, man, woe to the parent who is treating their child as a blueprint of themselves, or at least a second chance for themselves. Right. Not a good idea, man. You got to let those kids breathe, and they will scare you, they will disappoint you, and they will surprise you. And that's what's wonderful about this limited but infinitely complex creature called a human being. So be a little bit kind to yourself. Take the existentialist view of humanity. You're flawed from the start. You'll be flawed at the end. You'll have regrets.
But thinner.
You'll be thinner, man, and that's the point. Self-restriction. But, man, you'll be more wrong than you are right. You'll take more than you give, and that's probably inevitable. But, you keep trying. And I really appreciate talking to you, man.
You are a cool dude, let me tell you. I don't use...
No,
Thank you, man. Last thing, I know that you told me offline, we were texting to each other, that you have a whole bunch of events coming up. Do you want to mention some of these to our audience?
Yeah, so I just went through a special forces training thing with Tim Kennedy. He took me through all this tactical training, and so I'm doing this show called Best Of with Bryan Callen on YouTube.
Nice.
I interviewed Sammy the Bull Gravano. I took him to dinner. The underboss.
Yeah.
I flew him out to LA. It was just, I just wanted to see. He tells great stories. I wanted to see what that was about. I went python hunting in Florida. I have a lot of plans. I'm doing a lot of things, so that's my show. I'm coming out with my special Man Tier September 3rd. I'll do Rogan, and I'll talk about it then. Okay. So I'm excited about that special. And I think I'm gonna start my own podcast. I think I'm gonna start my own podcast, and I want to talk to people like you, because I have so many questions for you. I have so many questions.
Oh, I look forward to it anytime.
I want to talk about the Parasitic Mind. I want to talk about all the things you've read, because you're what you do is way more interesting to me than what I do, and I have questions that are way more important to me than anything you could ask me. So I hope you're going to be a guest on the new podcast.
Anytime, I'd love to. Thank you so much, Bryan. Stay off. We'll talk. We'll say goodbye offline. Such a pleasure meeting you. Hopefully, we can stay in contact with one another.
Please, if you come to LA, dinner's on me.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you so much, buddy. Let me shut it off for a second. Hi, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed my terrific chat with Bryan Callen. What a great guy. Any case, if you'd like to support my work, you can do so in one of several ways. You can go to my donation platforms, be it PayPal, Patreon, and or Subscribestar, and donate. If you're watching this via YouTube, below the description section of the clip, there is a thanks with a heart icon that you can use to donate in support of my work. You can, of course, also make sure to subscribe to the channel and to the podcast. You can head off to Apple and rate the show, hopefully 5 stars. All sorts of ways by which you can support my efforts. I hope that you'll consider doing so. And I'm very excited for the upcoming guests. Many, many fantastic guests. Stay tuned. Take care, everybody. Thanks. Ciao.